Now that we have our entity class ready, in order for me to create objects of this class and save the details into the database, we need to create first something called SessionFactory. And this particular SessionFactory is required in almost all the programs that we're going to work. So what we will do is we'll create a utility class for obtaining a SessionFactory object. So I'm going to right click on this entity package here and then say new class, but I want this to be a new package called utils, and then I'm going to call this as HibernateUtil. Press enter. A new class with a new package has been created. Let's go and create a private static SessionFactory variable. And to import the same, I'm going to press Command Shift O. And since there is no name conflict, it simply added the import statement over here. Now the reason I made this as a private static is because we want this object to be a singleton, so that wherever I ask for a factory, it is going to check if the factory is initialized, it's going to return the same. But if it is not initialized, it's going to initialize one and then return the same. So let's go and create a public function to do the job. I'm going to say static. It returns a SessionFactory. Let's call it as get SessionFactory. I'm going to say here return factory. But we also have to check, has this been initialized? If it's not initialized, we have to initialize the same. So I'm going to say here if factory equals to null, then we're going to do the initialization. Remember, static variables have been initialized by default with null. A SessionFactory represents a database, and a session represents a database connection. Since the SessionFactory represents a DB, we have to pass the DB connectivity information. Let's create a properties object for the same. So we say properties, props equals to new properties, and the properties is from java.util. So I'm going to select the same, and then we're going to add few properties over here. So I'll say props.set property. The first property is about the driver. So I'm going to say hibernate.connection.driver. The value for that depends on the DB that you want to connect to. Since I want to connect to H2 database, it's going to be arg.h2.driver. I'm going to make a copy of this and change this to URL. URL happens to be the JDBC connection string that you want to use. And if you don't remember, you can go to the H2 console and then you can copy the URL from here. So I'm going to copy this, go back over here and replace this one. So I'm going to make another copy of this, paste it and change this to username. And the username for our DB is SA in my case. And then there is a password that I have to give, which is empty string. So that's this password and this is empty string. Hibernate converts all your Java function calls into an appropriate SQL command. For this, it makes use of something called dialect class. For most of the applications, this dialect class is not necessary, but for very important complex queries, without the dialect, Hibernate will not work and will throw an error. So let's give this properly by typing props.set property of hibernate.dialect. The value for this is arg.hibernate.dialect.h2 dialect. Now if you want to see what other dialects you have, you can press Command Shift T on Mac, Control Shift T on Windows, or you can go to Navigate, Open Type, and then type dialect, and you should see arg hibernate dialect, which is an abstract class over here. If you select that and then press function key 4 or F4, you will see that there is a bunch of classes that extend the dialect class, and H2 dialect is one of them. So if you want to work with, for example, MySQL, you will see that there is a MySQL dialect. There is more specific version of the same MySQL 5 dialect, and expand the same thing to see more and more features. So if you want to work with Oracle, for example, there's an Oracle 8i dialect, Oracle 9i dialect, then 10G, and then you have 12C dialect also. So likewise for Microsoft SQL Server, you will see that there is an abstract transact SQL dialect, but if you expand that, you see an SQL Server dialect. There is an SQL Server 2005 and then 2008, and then you have here 2012 dialect. So let's come out of that. Now earlier I mentioned that Hibernate can create the tables for you if the tables don't exist. So I'm going to make a copy of this and add here, change this to something called HBM to DDL. HBM stands for Hibernate Mapping, to DDL, which is Data Definition Language. So basically Hibernate is going to convert our Hibernate mapping, which we are given in the category using annotation, into appropriate data definition language like create, alter, drop. And here I'm going to give a value of update, which means it is only going to make the changes if needed, otherwise it is not going to do anything. Since Hibernate is going to create the SQL commands for you, if you are interested to see what SQL commands have been generated, you can also give here something called show_SQL with a value of true, and it will show you the SQL commands. While the SQL command is very lengthy, if you want to format that, you can also use here format_SQL and say that it is true. Whenever you don't want, you just come here and then disable this with value of false. Now that we have enough properties here, let's create a configuration object representing our DB. To do that, I'm going to say configuration CFG equals to new configuration, and make sure to import it from the Hibernate package. So there are two configuration classes. One comes from Java X Security Auth Login. That is not what we want. And this is the one that we want. I select the same. Now we have a configuration object. This configuration object can create a SessionFactory for us with the information we have given here. The first thing that we have to do is to say that we have a class called category that this CFG should manage. So I'm going to say CFG.add annotated class, and I'm going to supply my category.class as a parameter. Now in order to create a SessionFactory, you simply have to say CFG.build SessionFactory, and that actually should give you a SessionFactory object. I can assign this to factory. Hibernate version 4 onwards, the factory can be created and kept in something called as a registry. If you want to use that, you can say here service registry. Let's call it as registry equals to new standard service registry builder dot apply settings, and then we supply the props. So where we have given all these information, then we say here dot build. That gives me what's called as a service registry, which we have to import. And once we import this, we can now say here that this registry, which contains all this information, should be used for building the SessionFactory here. So I take this and pass it as an argument, and now we have our factory ready. So all of our programs, we're going to simply say HibernateUtil.getSessionFactory to get a SessionFactory object.